Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, and as well as other world leaders set to attend the ASEAN summit. And meaty minister affirms US tariffs will not trigger recession. All this and more coming up on AWANI International. Four world leaders are expected to attend the 47th ASEAN summit taking place in Kuala Lumpur this October. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim says this will include US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Also expected are Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, current chairs of the BRICS and G20 respectively. Heads of government from ASEAN member states and dialogue partners are also set to attend. According to Anwar, key issues on the agenda include intra-ASEAN trade, cross-border investment, energy and connectivity. Malaysia remains competitive in terms of average US tariff levels compared to its regional peers. Investment, Trade and Industry Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Abdul Aziz says countries impacted by the tariffs may experience slower growth but not necessarily fall into recession. However, he warned that any slowdown in the US economy, which accounts for nearly 27% of global GDP, could have far-reaching consequences. He said one concern would be whether the tariffs affect demand for Malaysian goods exported to the US. Zafrul noted that Malaysia was already expecting a lower growth rate this year. Last month, Bank Negara Malaysia revised its 2025 growth forecast to between 4 and 4.8%, down from the previous projection of 4.5 to 5.5%. We'll go for a quick break. Stay tuned for more.
Buli di sekolah. Isu ini bukan perkara baru.
Buli tertakluk kepada perbuatan agresif secara fizikal.
Apa sebenarnya Jerabu punca utama yang menyumbang kepada masalah ini serta kesannya kepada kesihatan kita?
Mereka akan mengalami iritasi kepada mata. Selain itu, iritasi kepada saluran pernafasan.
The Cambodia-Thailand General Border Committee's ceasefire should be independently monitored, as it is only the first step to peace. In an exclusive interview to AWANI International, United States Ambassador to Malaysia, Edgar Kagan, highlights the importance of reaching a durable and effective ceasefire.
And I think that bringing the leaders here, getting them to agree to a ceasefire, getting them to agree to hold a meeting of the GBC, which is the General Border Committee, was very important. But the GBC is not an end. It is a step towards the end. I think that the most important outcome was the two countries met. They were able to reach agreement on a number of things having to do with the implementation of the ceasefire. They also agreed to have another meeting of the GBC within a month. And I think that all those things are part of the process of trying to reach a durable and effective ceasefire, which is very much in keeping with what President Trump, Secretary Rubio have called for and have pushed in their engagements with the leaders of Cambodia and Thailand, as well as in their conversations with Prime Minister Anwar. I think our view is there needs to be monitoring of the ceasefire. There needs to be independent monitoring. The GBC agreed that there would be an interim effort by ASEAN defense advisors and defense attaches based in Bangkok and in Phnom Penh. I think that's very, very important. In the end, the two countries are the ones who need to take the lead. They need to send very clear signals to all of their troops, all of their civilian personnel, to avoid any provocations, to fully implement the ceasefire. There should be independent monitoring of some kind or observation of some kind. And there needs to be redoubled commitment at every level to try and restore normalcy, bring civilians who fled back to the areas along the border, and try and also return detainees and make sure that both countries are taking steps to reduce tensions along the border.
Meanwhile, similar sentiments were expressed by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. In a statement, he said both he and President Donald Trump expect the governments of Cambodia and Thailand to honor their commitments to end the conflict. Rubio described the General Border Committee meeting as an important step towards solidifying the ceasefire arrangement and establishing the ASEAN observation mechanism. He also praised Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim for facilitating the process and added that the U.S. will continue to support Malaysia, ASEAN and both countries moving forward. The U.S. has agreed to amend a presidential executive order to remove overlapping tariffs on Japanese goods, according to Tokyo's trade negotiator. The move follows urgent talks in Washington aimed at resolving what he calls a regrettable oversight.
Ryosei Akazawa met U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to press for action. He urged them to ensure that a 15% levy, agreed last month, would not be stacked on goods such as beef already facing higher duties. Akazawa said the officials promised to revise the July 31st presidential order. He confirmed that Lutnick and Bessent indicated that President Donald Trump would separately lower auto tariffs from 27.5% to 15%, aligning with last month's trade deal.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has held a phone call on Thursday, focusing on trade and global politics as both nations face steep new U.S. tariffs. The call comes a day after Lula tells Reuters he will rally BRICS nations to respond to U.S. President Donald Trump's trade measures.
Lula later confirmed he would make a state visit to India in early 2026. His office said the two leaders discussed the global economic climate and the impact of unilateral tariffs, noting that Brazil and India were then the hardest hit. Meanwhile, Brasilia said Modi and Lula had reaffirmed their aim to boost annual bilateral trade to over $20 billion by 2030, up from about $12 billion the previous year. On Wednesday, Trump announced an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, raising the total duty to 50%. Brazil faced the same 50% tariff, with lower rates for sectors such as aircraft, energy and orange juice.
Russian President Vladimir Putin may meet U.S. President Donald Trump next week, just as Trump's deadline for Russia over the Ukraine ceasefire comes to an end. Russia's Deputy United Nations Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky, however, says no meeting is planned yet between Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Polyansky said several venues had been considered for the Putin-Trump meeting and that the leaders had settled on one without disclosing it. He noted the timing appeared to be next week based on the president's own remarks. He said he had not heard of any plans for talks with Zelensky and stressed he was not involved in such discussions. The last summit between leaders of the US and Russia took place in June 2021, when Putin met then-President Joe Biden in Geneva.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the phone earlier today, according to the state media. This comes ahead of Putin's expected meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. CCTV reported that Putin updated Xi on recent U.S.-Russia contacts and reaffirmed Moscow's readiness to maintain close ties with Beijing. Xi said China welcomed continued U.S.-Russia engagement, supported improved relations, and backed progress towards a political solution to the Ukraine crisis. He noted that complex problems required careful solutions and pledged China's continued role in facilitating talks on regional conflicts. Xi and Putin have maintained close relations, meeting more than 40 times over the past decade.
今年是中俄建交75周年。
Israel's Political Security Cabinet approves a plan early on Friday to take control of Gaza City, marking yet another major escalation to the war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says the Israel Defense Forces will prepare to occupy Gaza City while delivering humanitarian aid outside combat zones.
In a Fox News interview, Netanyahu confirmed plans to seize the coastal territory, but said governance would be transferred to Arab forces. He said Israel did not want permanent control, aimed only for a security perimeter, and would not act as Gaza's governing authority. On Thursday, Netanyahu declared Israel intended to take military control of the entire Gaza Strip, though Friday's plan targeted the northern city specifically. In response, Hamas official Osama Hamdan told Al Jazeera that the group would treat any governing force in Gaza as an occupying power tied to Israel.
Meanwhile, countries are reacting to Israel's plan to take control of Gaza City. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called Israel's decision to escalate its Gaza offensive wrong and urged it to reconsider immediately. He said the move would not end the conflict or free hostages, but instead bring more bloodshed. Spain, meanwhile, condemned Israel's decision to escalate its military occupation of Gaza. The Netherlands said Israel made the wrong move and reiterated that Gaza belongs to the Palestinians. Australia also urged Israel not to go down this path, warning it would worsen the humanitarian crisis. Turkey condemned the plan, calling on the UN and the international community to act and put an end to it. The UN has earlier warned that a full military takeover of Gaza could have catastrophic consequences for civilians and hostages. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry said Israel's plan to occupy Gaza exposes the true nature of its war and unjustified campaign against Palestinian civilians. It called the move a dangerous and illegal escalation. In other news, US President Donald Trump has called for the immediate resignation of new Intel CEO Tan Lip-Bu over his ties to Chinese firms. In response, Tan says he has the full backing of the company's board and has reached out to the White House for clarification.
In the letter to staff posted on Intel's website, Tan said he had contacted the White House to clear up what he described as misinformation about his track record. He added that he shared Trump's commitment to advancing U.S. national and economic security. Trump's comments followed a letter from Republican Senator Tom Cotton to Intel's board chair, raising concerns about Tan's connections to Chinese firms, as well as a recent criminal case involving his former firm, Cadence Design. It marks a rare instance of a US president publicly calling for a CEO's ouster and has sparked debate among investors, with Intel's shares closing down 3% on Thursday. Reuters reported in April that Tan had invested at least $200 million in Chinese advanced manufacturing and chip companies, some with links to China's military.
China accuses the Philippines of playing with fire after President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says his country would join any China-US conflict over Taiwan. Marcos cites the Philippines' proximity to Taiwan and its large Filipino community as reasons involvement would be unavoidable.
China's foreign ministry responded that neither geography nor overseas populations justified interference in another nation's internal affairs. It urged the Philippines to follow the One China principle and avoid actions it viewed as playing with fire on issues concerning China's core interests. The exchange came as tensions between Beijing and Manila rose over disputes in the South China Sea. Both sides have accused each other of aggressive maneuvers and sovereignty violations.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow all our social media accounts. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.